the Radio Today podcast with Jen Seyderhelm.
Hi, and welcome back for 2026. Straight back into it with the release of GFK Radio 360 Survey 8 2025, the first time the last survey of the year has been released in the following. We'll go around the 5 metros, unpack the cumes, deep dive into the DAB Plus numbers and changes, and Steve Ahern catches up with the networks for their spin on the results too. GFK Radio 360 Metro Survey 8 2025. The strategy for the change in release dates is to get radio audience numbers in front of advertisers early in the calendar year, rather than waiting until March, which has been the practice until now. Another impact of the change is that many breakfast lineups measured here have now varied or gone altogether. 4BC in Brisbane, for example, has undergone a total facelift, with only Gary Hardgrave on drive of the local weekday presenters remaining from 12 months ago. The most significant change is for ARN's Gold network, where Christian O'Connell has replaced Jonesy and Amanda on breakfast on Gold 101.7 in Sydney, and they are now presenting a national drive show. Other 2025 breakfast lineups that have changed are the Jimmy and Nath show with Emma on Today FM in Sydney. It's now Nath and Emma only. Vossi and Brandy on SEN 1170 Sydney. Andrew Vossi Voss has moved to mornings with Greg Brandy Alexander joined by Jimmy Smith Monday to Thursdays. Ash Lutzi and Nikki Osborne on Nova 106.9 in Brisbane. It's now Nick Lutzi and Susie O'Neill. Susie is back after a year as a Nova floater and doing other things. Nick is Nick Allen Ducat, who's moved back to Brisbane from Hit Network Breakfast based in Newcastle. Peter Fegan on 4BC Brisbane is now Dean Miller with Sophie Formica. Dean is a radio veteran. Sophie shifts from afternoons. Hayley and Max, Mix 102.3 Adelaide. Mix is now Gold 102.3. And breakfast is currently being hosted by Beck Morse, while Ben Harvey and Liam Stapleton, are on enforced gardening leave due to leaving their Nova contracts early. They have an official Adelaide start date of April 1, which apparently isn't a joke. Bernie and Emma G are also in Adelaide at SAFM. Emma's back from maternity leave, with her replacement Belle Sloan now being incorporated permanently into the show to make them a trio. And Pete and Kimber with Ben Cousins at Mix 94.5 in Perth. Ben is no longer a featured part of Mix Breakfast, but will still pop up as a regular guest. Survey 8 was conducted for CRA between Sunday, October 5 to Saturday, December 13, 2025. In Sydney, Smooth FM 95.3 finished 2025 as the number 1 station with a 13% share, up 1.6, and as the most listened to station in Australia. 2GB's Ben Fordham was number 1 on breakfast, down 1.9 though. Kyle and Jackie O were number 1 FM, up 0.2. Jonesy and Amanda went out on a high, up 0.8 to 9.7. In Melbourne, there was daylight between Ross and Russ on 3AW, who were down 0.3 to 19.8, and Christian O'Connell, 11.0 down 0.2 on Gold 104.3 on breakfast. 1.5 drops for Fifi, Fev and Nick on the Fox to fall below Nova, Smooth and the ABC breakfast teams. 3AW just ahead of Gold 104.3 overall. Triple M Brisbane leads overall in that city. Nova 106.9's Ash Lutzi and Nikki Osborne took top spot in breakfast in their last survey as a trio. A 1-point drop for Robin Kipp and Corey Oates on Brisbane's Kiss 97.3, probably attributable to their dumping, then reinstatement during the Survey 8 measurement period. 4BC was the most negatively affected this survey by their significant lineup changes. Adelaide, Triple M also number 1 overall. It was a great survey for Nova Talk Station 5AA, second on breakfast for Dave and Will behind Triple M and gaining ground. No change in Perth with Nova 93.7 number 1 and in breakfast. 96 FM was up, as they usually are to cap off the year. 92.9 Triple M appeared to pick up listeners from Mix 94.5, with Pete and Kimber returning just as a duo this year, hopefully giving the station better stability for their listeners. Nova 969 had more listeners in Sydney than Kiss 106.5. Gold was the most listened to in Melbourne, but down. Finally, commercial radio reaches 12.4 million Australians every week. Towards these results, Nine Radio Head of Content Greg Burns had this to say about 4BC, 3AW and 2GB.
Good results in Survey 8 for the lighter music stations, but overall 2GB, 3AW have dominated the year. That's off the back of those breakfast and morning shows in Sydney and Melbourne. The total radio and the streaming numbers in those markets remain and have been all year extraordinary. Ross and Russ, Ben Fordham, Tom Elliott, Mark Levy, they've delivered at the highest standard right throughout 25. And then that flows through all the day parts. And then heading into 26, we have a wonderful foundation in place around those breakfast and morning programs. And network-wide, some exciting opportunities for 4BC and 6PR. In those markets, some lineup changes, some shift changes, and some new voices. So between a mix of the old and new, we're in a really good place heading into 26.
Metro Content Director for the ACE radio network, John Vertigan, said of the network creeping closer to 1 million listeners across the country.
Quite pleasing for us to finish off 2025 with some good stories as we wrap up the year. We reasonably pleased with the overall health of our metro stations across the four of them. 4BH continues to be a standout, equal number one, 25 plus in the market. Number one streaming, number one on the weekend, 10 plus. Barbecue Bob, still sounding amazing. Gee, he loves what he does and is thriving in our environment. In Sydney, we've seen some growth as well. 2UE building momentum, 331,000 weekly listeners, and now that is the biggest under ACE control. Kathy Jubb was new to breakfast in 2025, and she's certainly resonating and doing a fantastic job as well. Loving what she's doing. And in Melbourne, we've, I guess, remained steady overall. Magic and MP balancing each other out. Combined audience of 280,000, and as I've said before, we sell a combo in Melbourne, so 280,000 is okay for us, but obviously some more growth would be nice in that market. Overall, the four stations has grown to more than 900,000 on average throughout 2025, and only a couple of years ago it was in the 700,000. So, yeah, we are pleased with the direction we're going.
Cumes now for Survey 8. Sydney's Smooth 95.3 is the most listened to station in the country, and its breakfast presenter Bogart Torelli was second only to Kyle and Jackie O on Kiss 106.5. This was a tough survey, despite Triple M leading in Brisbane and Adelaide, for SCA stations in other capital cities. Triple M Melbourne and Sydney were significantly affected by the end of the AFL and NRL seasons, dropping 85,000 and 55,000 Cume audience respectively. Fifi, Fev and Nick on the Fox FM suffered the biggest losses of all to their breakfast audience share. The only people to pick up breakfast listeners in Melbourne were Mike Perso on Smooth 91.5, unsurprisingly, and ABC Classic and News. It's interesting to look at how the same show lands in different cities. Based on Cume audience, there was no change to Kyle and Jackie O's listenership in Sydney or Melbourne in Survey 8. For Conchetta and Luca on Triple J, the story couldn't be more different. Ahead of the Hottest 100, which always improves ratings in the first survey of the year, Triple J shed some 50,000 audience in Sydney while picking up a healthy 37,000 in Melbourne. Sydney Breakfast was down near 40,000 as well. Conchetta Caristo is currently in the jungle for I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here. The impact of that on her profile and listeners to the station should also be seen in Survey 1 2026, where all capital cities should see some uptick in audience. Finally, Jonesy and Amanda on Gold 101.7 in Sydney were able to leave on a high ahead of their move to Drive and replacement by Christian O'Connell, whose own breakfast show in Melbourne saw a near 50,000 cumulative drop. A very happy head of content for ARN's Gold Network, Sue Carter, spoke with Steve Ahern.
Sue, nice to talk to you on this Survey 8 release day. What's your impression across the Gold Network?
My impression is my entire team have a great smile on their face today. I don't think you're lucky enough to get handed the type of day that we've had today too often in the world of radio, and I say that as someone who's been around for too many decades to mention. I look young for my age, so... Yeah, I mean, it's funny. So one of my team just called me, I'm like their mother, and I'm not your mother. But these radio stations are my babies, and you don't get the opportunity to go look at that result that we've had on Gold. Gold went up in Melbourne, Gold went up in Sydney, Cruise went up in Adelaide, and in Perth, 96 went up and a 1.4 there. So it's been a really good day on a human being level. It's been a really good day on a brand level, and I think it just reinforces how strong the Gold brand is. I think we've also had some great success across all shifts, which is one of the strengths. It's never been a brand, or for the 8 years I've been here, I've been determined it wouldn't be a brand that is only about a breakfast show. Sure, we've got a fabulous breakfast show now across the Gold Network, and we had a fabulous breakfast show in Jonesy and Amanda sitting in Sydney. 20 years is an incredible run. But right across the board, across the workday, across weekends, even evening shifts, the format has been incredibly strong. And I also think it's just a really good story for radio. I hate it when people say to me, "Oh, how are you doing? Is radio dying?" And I don't carry it around in my back pocket, but I almost do carry the figure around and say, hey, look at the results in Melbourne in particular, where you've got multiple stations over 1 million cume and have had for years. I just think it's a great story for radio.
It sure is.
SCA Head of Broadcast Content Matthew O'Reilly was honest about some of the station's dips, but spoke to how the network still captured their audience that matters.
It seems a bit strange in January 2026 talking about 2005 results, but all the same, let's look at them. What do you think? How did you go?
Yeah, it is a bit of a strange feeling today, but given the rolling nature of the surveys and sort of the information that we get going into them, we knew today was going to be a little bit challenging of a day, and it hasn't panned out too bad from where we sit. The 20 to 54 picture, which we call the audience that matters, is still really healthy. We're number 1 or 2 in each market, with the exception of Sydney. And I think for us, what we are sort of, as you talk about referencing 25 and looking ahead to 26, we're sort of really focusing on what the 2026 opportunities are. And for us, that's a really sort of consistent lineup with highly localised shows. And at the moment, it's sort of, we're having chats around how we're leveraging our partnership with our new owners, Channel 7, and bringing the best creators in the country together, and what that looks like for the road ahead. So, yes, we're looking at it, and yes, it's a piece of information that we will use, but largely our focus is firmly on Survey 1 for this year, which we're 2 days into.
DAB Plus Survey 8. Ahead of ARN launching new stations in Adelaide, Brisbane and Perth, and the wrap-up of the festive season, which saw most capital cities listen to a lot more Coles radio, with some sneaky elf radio for good measure, across the country, digital radio listening yielded some interesting changes and data for networks and advertisers. There have been some stations quietly dropped in the last 12 months. Easy Hits and Triple M 70s vanished from Sydney, Melbourne and Brisbane DAB, as did Triple M 80s in Adelaide and Perth. These stations likely made way for SCA's launch of their new Heart network and associated stations Heart and Heart Hits. They were announced in October 2025. While you can tune in via Listener, these stations may have been stalled by a trademark application for Heart by Global Media and Entertainment, and a tweaking to the original concept to include a 60s station, Heart 60s, perhaps inspired by the success of the Capital Radio Network's Forever 60s that launched last year in Canberra, Perth, and a few other markets with Capital Radio Network stations. RSN DAB departed Melbourne after the station was purchased by SEN. This survey, SEN Sydney, was included in the Brisbane DAB Plus numbers too. CADA was the top station again in Sydney with 150 QM audience there and significantly less elsewhere. The top station in the country was Coles Radio with nearly a 400k QM audience and a significant increase over the festive period in all metros, with the exception of Melbourne, where their numbers are still above 100k. SCA's Dance Hits was top there for the first time above Gold 80s and Coles. Coles Radio pipped Smooth in Brisbane and Adelaide, which should be a nudge to advertisers. In Perth, Smooth was again toppled, not by Coles, but by 96 FM 80s, an ARN station, which hosts Christian O'Connell and Jonesy and Amanda's catch-up podcasts as well. Last week, as part of the document released by the Copyright Tribunal of Australia, with its decision on changes to the Copyright Amendment Act 2006, Commercial Radio and Audio CEO Liz Young was rather dismissive of the role of digital radio to the industry in the future. But there are a total of 145 more stations on air across the 5 capital cities than there were before DAB Plus was introduced, some that are networked across multiple. Pop-up Christmas station Elf Radio, on air in 3 cities and streaming, had 24,000 listeners in Survey 8. And to wrap up this podcast on GFK Survey 8, DAB Plus has added a total QM audience of 3,863,000 people to radio listening since stations launched across the 5 cities. Nearly 4 million in just the 5 metros, so there's definitely value and money in digital radio. That's it for this week and for Survey 8. Thanks for joining me. I'll catch you next time.
Radio Today with Jen Seyderhelm. Find more at radiotoday.com.au.